Welcome to the NNJR Trackside Classroom Series. Today we're going to be talking about how to go faster safely, which obviously is an important dimension of trying to do better as we're on track. So without further ado, let's dive in. The examples today are going to be Watkins Glen examples, but the material here applies to any track. And that starts with our disclaimer, which says we do our best to put some good suggestions in here, but you use them at your own risk. Same thing that applies anytime we get on the track. So let's dive right in. How do we go faster and do it in a smart way? Well, you're going to hear me stress the need for a consistent baseline, and you'll hear the same from any other coach or driving instructor. And once we have that baseline, then we want to change one thing, which hopefully is an improvement. It may or may not be, actually, but we want to do that in an incremental way, nothing dramatic. We're talking about small improvements. And if it is an improvement, then we practice it until it becomes a part of our baseline. And that is a step that many people gloss over and don't pay enough attention to, because if we've gotten used to driving a particular corner in a particular way, and we now discover, well, we can do better, it's going to take some repetition before that becomes automatic. In other words, before that becomes the baseline. And then the other dimension here is we're going to talk about go, no go, which is an important part of how we ought to be thinking every time we go on the track. And that's a subset of the bigger situational awareness topic. So let's dive in. So just to kind of stress some of these points some more. This is a slide Peter Krause used at our high performance driving seminar a couple of years ago. And he stresses that getting better is all about the best execution of fundamental skills. If you don't know Peter, he's a very well-known pro coach, a VIR expert, actually a lot more tracks than that, but that's his home track. And he really is very good at breaking down the driving task into small pieces that can each be improved. And so he's a person you want to listen to. So here's what he said. And notice his first thing under best execution is consistency. And he mentions speed. He mentions car placement, control input, speed, meaning how fast or how slowly do I turn the wheel or step on the gas, and so on. And one way you can look at that is, we'll use this photo that's on the slide as an example. And you can do this with a pretty simple video. If the video has any information on it at all, like speed in particular, you can learn a lot. So if you were to look at several laps at the apex of turn 1, which is where this is at Watkins Glen, and have the speed, if this lap is 70 miles an hour and you look at several other laps and they're 67, 72 and so on, well, you're not being consistent. On the other hand, if you look at several laps and they're all right around 70 miles an hour, that's a good sign. Another thing we can pick up from the video is, what's the attitude of the car? In other words, where is it pointed? Right now, the car is pointed, just to the right of the grandstands. Well, if we look at other laps, and some of those were pointed to the, right at the grandstand, then we clearly haven't turned the car enough, and so on. Just using that as an example of how we can measure consistency with nothing more than a GoPro video. And of course, Peter says we want to practice deliberately and add speed incrementally. while we balance risk and reward. And he mentions also that traffic is a big part of this, and I'll say more about that in a bit. So let's talk theory for just a second. How do we improve? How do we learn? Well, we've all heard the term learning curve. That's kind of the dotted red line on this graph. Well, in practice, we typically learn in steps. It's really more, we try something different, or whether that's on purpose or accidentally, and we learn, well, that's better. So all of a sudden, my performance has gotten better, and that's the steps you see here, and that so sometimes we're on. And in fact, we need to be on this plateau, if you will, or flat part of this step function learning curve, because we have to integrate whatever we learned here. We can't just, try a different technique once for one corner and expect to be able to repeat that. We need to repeat it a bunch of times so it becomes second nature. That's what these long, steps, that's what these represent. And of course, there is a risk that we get stuck in a rut and even get worse. That's kind of the dreaded plateau or so on. But most drivers, if they pay attention, can avoid that. So let's say a little bit more about what it means to have a consistent baseline. What are some of the things we want to look at? I mentioned some of these with that picture on the Peter Krause slide, but minimal variance in reference points. So what does that mean? Well, turn-in points are the first one to look at. Am I turning in at the same point each time? And by the way, at the same speed at that turn-in point. That's the most important reference point for you to focus on, based on my experience with most drivers who are trying to improve. If they're not consistent, getting consistent at the turn-in point will make a big difference. So if you're consistent there, then let's look at the other ones. Let's look at the apex speed, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, and attitude of the car at the apex. And to get even better, let's look at how consistent our end of braking point is. That's what I mean here by minimal variance in reference points. And car attitude is related to the sight picture here, because as not so much probably at the turn-in, but at any other point during the corner, our sight picture is going to tell us where the car is pointed. And we want that to be consistent, so that if we turn and all of a sudden the picture's different, then it'll set off alarm bells because something's wrong. Maybe there's some oil on the track and all of a sudden the car isn't turning, that sort of thing. And of course, the car itself is a part of this too, because we want it to feel and behave the same way. If it doesn't feel the same, if it doesn't behave the same way, then that also should set off an alarm bell. So how do we measure? Well, we've already talked about some of this, but let's get a little more specific. A lot of people look at lap time. It's a terrible measure, because you could, if you're not consistent, yes, if you're running, lap times within a second all the time and able to repeat that day in, day out, then very good. But that's not where most people are. And even if you are doing that, I guarantee there is variance underneath that has room for improvement buried in it. So that's where segment times come in, and looking at segment times, meaning basically corner times, the time through a particular corner or a couple of corners on a track. That's where, if you're going to have information using the stopwatch, so to speak, that we want to focus. I've already mentioned you can learn a lot just from looking at the video. and see what you see from the video. But even if we don't have any data or video or anything, we can do old-fashioned indexing. We can look at our exit speed coming out of a corner and compare this lap to last lap and so on. If we know that at this particular track out point, I'm normally at 82 miles an hour, and now all of a sudden, I'm at 80, well, I didn't execute as well. Or if I now am at 84, well, I did something better. Hopefully you know what that is. Those are some ways to think about measuring. So what do I want to change, or what's the area to focus on? Well, low-hanging fruit for advanced drivers tends to be around getting the foot on the floor sooner. The wide open throttle, WOT. If you can get your foot on the floor, 20 feet sooner, you're going to gain a fair bit of time. The hardest part to gain time with and to work your way up to is corner entry speed. And I want to put that in the context of the priority. The line is always the most important. If you're not turning in at the right point, for example, I found myself recently looking at some video, and I found that I was turning in early in some cases. Well, if we're turning in early, guess what? I don't care what else we focus on, we need to fix that first. Next is corner exit, and that's where, how soon can we get on the gas, and probably more importantly, how fast can I get my foot on the floor? That's got to be the priority for most people. Once we have that figured out, now it's corner entry, meaning corner entry speed, and last and least, late braking. Because if we screw up our corner exit by coming in faster, we've gone backwards, and so on. Now, if you have data, you can get some more clues. You can compare the 2 or 3 fastest laps, like you see on the graph here, and notice that there's some differences that are circled, and use that information to say, okay, well, I can fix that so that now I can make all of my laps as good as the fastest lap. Even better, if you have, AIM, you have segment data. And yes, it takes a little bit of work to get this set up, but once you have it set up, it's extremely useful. And look at the segment data and your best segment time versus your typical one, and you'll come away with areas to work on. If you have Garmin, it gives you 3 opportunities that it thinks are the highest priority for you to work on, and it gives you kind of line, which is probably the least useful of those, but it shows you the braking, shows you your apex speed, and so on. So it lays it right out there for you. And if you have VBox, you can look at an ideal lap video and definitely get some areas to focus on. So here, let's use a couple of examples. Let's use turn 1 at Watkins Glen. How soon can I get on the gas, the throttle application point? How soon is my foot on the floor? Well, and can I move that earlier? Well, I put up this trace graph here, which is a real throttle position graph from yours truly on a particularly bad lap, but notice the use of the throttle. I got on the gas, then it came off, on, off. I mean, not completely off, but it's not a steady progression up. And there's a long time between getting on the gas and getting the foot on the floor. That's what we don't want. In most corners, this should be a steady progression, and it should happen relatively quickly. So this is the kind of thing to look for. And if you don't have data, you can still force yourself to pay attention to where am I first getting my foot on the gas pedal, and then where am I able to get it on the floor. And if there's a big difference between those two, or if you find that you're feathering the gas, or God forbid, getting on it and then getting off of it, you know there's a lot of time to be gained. And in turn one at Watkins Glen, the risk factor from doing this isn't zero, but we have a lot of room on the outside at turn one, and so the risk factor isn't too bad. If we apply the same logic to turn 9, the off camber, how soon can I get on the gas? How soon is my foot on the floor? Well, now the risk factor is significantly higher because there isn't much room at turn 9. We should still do the analysis, and if we feel like we need to improve in turn 9, we should still look at it. But we just need to be aware that the risk is higher. Now, if we want to think about entry speed, what's my speed at turn in? Can I increase it slightly without affecting where I get my foot on the floor and where I put my foot on the gas? Well, again, turn 1 has some room on the outside. So assuming I increase my speed by a couple of miles an hour and not 5 or 10 miles an hour, then, this corner is probably, worth trying to do that. If we contrast that with turn 10, the high speed left, and ask ourselves the same questions, well, yes, there is some room out there, but the risk factor is significantly higher. And these are just the logic steps we need to apply as we're identifying ways to improve. And again, back to the importance of consistency. The lateral car position, the braking force, the entry speed, those are the things to look at. And notice Peter says work on corner exit before corner entry. That's you're going to hear that from you'll hear that from Skip Barber. You'll hear that from any coach that you talk to. And I want to use this slide to introduce this go no go concept, which Peter says if the car is out of position, not on the correct line, then no go on the next input. And so what does this mean? Well, it's a simple assessment that every one of us can and should use. And many of us sort of intuitively do this, but let's make it a little more explicit, because Peter points out that big mistakes often, if not usually, happen because of little ones accumulating and not being dealt with. So if we think it, when we turn in the car, for example, we turn it in and, we realize we're early, well, that should immediately tell us no go. In other words, we can't drive our normal line, and we, in particular, can't drive our normal put our foot on the floor point in the corner, and that's the no-go part. And Peter stresses how important it is to get the habit developed of saying no go if something's wrong. That may be when we turn in, which is always a good point, but it may be when we first got on the brakes and we realized that, gee, the car isn't stopping this like it normally does. Or maybe I got on the brakes too late and now I need to adjust. So this is all about, some of you have heard me refer to a switch in your head. If something's not right, the switch has to go from go to no go. It has to go from I'm driving through the corner in my normal fashion to I'm instead going to bail out on this corner get through it safely and then, proceed down the track. Now, situational awareness is also important if we want to get better. And this is simple things that not everybody is as good at as they should be. How far ahead are you looking? How far ahead are you actually seeing things? You should be looking at each flag station the instant they can be seen. Have you picked up the runoff spots? Are you aware of, sounds the car is making or smells from oil and antifreeze? And how well do you know yourself? Are you focused on this run, or you're really distracted? Is the traffic bothering you? That sort of thing. This is all part of getting better, because if we don't have an out in situations, where of all sorts on track, then it's going to bother us, and we make mistakes. Common mistakes are not anticipating, not dealing well with traffic, poorly time passes. All of these things, you may wonder what they have to do with getting better. They have everything to do with consistency. Because if we're not aware of what's going on around us and adjusting appropriately, how are we going to be consistent? Things happen on track. We have to deal with that. So this is really an essential part of your consistency if you are expecting to get better and better. So let me wrap up. We've talked a lot about having that consistent baseline, and then finding ways to measure changes to that and making incremental changes that will allow us to go faster, but do it in a safe fashion. And I can't emphasize enough the need to practice until whatever change you've incorporated becomes your new baseline. As I said before, that step is often overlooked. And make sure go, no go is part of what you're practicing. That, every time you turn the wheel, every time you get on the gas, is everything okay? And again, part of situational awareness, part of being safe on the track. And with all of that, if we do all of that in that kind of disciplined fashion, we can repeat the process. We get a new baseline. It's faster. It's faster, and we're more comfortable with it because we practiced it. Now we can change something else and continue to get better. I hope you found this useful. I look forward to look forward to getting your questions and comments at the track or via email, gilbert4@rcn.com. And with all that said, I look forward to seeing you at the track, and I will see you at the track soon.